Millionaire Cowboy finds freezing nurse at train station. Their love story made history. On the coldest night of her life, a lost nurse found more than shelter from the storm. She found a love that would heal her broken heart and change both their lives forever. Please don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel as a sign of support. The wind howled down the empty platform at the Wichita train station, sending sharp gusts slicing through the night. Snowflakes danced beneath the flickering overhead lights, sticking to the concrete and clinging to the few people huddled near the doors. Among them stood a woman wrapped in a thin hospital-issue coat, shivering uncontrollably. Her name was Emily Carter, a registered nurse who had just lost her job at the St. Luke's Medical Center. Her shift had ended like any other, except this time, she didn't clock out. She was let go, her contract terminated without warning due to budget cuts. With barely enough savings to afford rent, she packed her things and took the first train back home to Topeka. Only the connecting train was delayed, severely delayed, and the station's waiting room was closed for renovations. Emily's fingers were going numb. She pulled her duffel bag closer to her feet and rubbed her gloved hands together, trying not to cry. She was too proud to ask for help, and no one in sight looked remotely approachable, except for the man on the far end of the platform. He stood next to a steaming paper cup, cowboy hat tilted slightly forward, boots scuffed but expensive. Something about him seemed oddly out of place. He wasn't pacing, he wasn't complaining, he was just watching. That man was Jackson Reed, a rancher turned real estate developer who'd made his fortune restoring abandoned farmlands across the Midwest. Despite owning half the county, Jackson still dressed like the cowboy he'd been raised to be. That night, he was supposed to catch a late train to Denver for a board meeting. But when he noticed Emily from across the tracks, something pulled at him. She looked fragile but determined, like she was trying her hardest not to collapse. Jackson approached her slowly, coffee in hand. "You all right, miss?" he asked in a low, gravelly voice. Emily jumped slightly but composed herself. "I'm fine, it's just cold." He glanced at her coat. "That's not made for Kansas in January. Take this." He handed her the cup. She hesitated. "I can't take your coffee." "It's not coffee, it's hot cocoa," he smiled. "And besides, I got another one in the thermos." Her hands trembled as she took the cup, grateful for the warmth seeping through her fingers. "Thanks." Jackson nodded, eyes narrowing just slightly. "You headed somewhere or just passing through?" "Topeka. My train got delayed." He saw the dark circles under her eyes, the worn soles of her sneakers. He'd seen people down on their luck before, but something about her tugged at his heart. Not pity, respect. She looked like someone who had worked too hard and rested too little. "Well," he said, tipping his hat, "if you don't mind a bit of cowboy company, I reckon we can wait out this cold together." Emily managed a small smile. "I wouldn't mind that." And so began a night neither of them would ever forget. Jackson sat down beside Emily on the icy bench, unscrewing the lid from his thermos and pouring more hot cocoa into his cup. He offered her another refill, and she accepted with a quiet, "Thank you." The warmth of the drink and his calm presence made the cold feel slightly more bearable. "You from Topeka?" he asked, his breath visible in the air. "Born and raised," she replied, holding the cup close to her mouth. "Left a few years ago for a nursing job in Wichita. Thought I'd build a life there, but things didn't exactly go as planned." He didn't pry, just nodded and took a sip. "I know that story. Went to school in Amarillo thinking I'd be a vet. Dropped out 2 years in. Ended up working my uncle's ranch. Then bought some land, sold it, bought more. Now I own a bunch of property I never meant to have." She raised an eyebrow. "So you're a rancher turned real estate guy?" "Something like that," Jackson said with a grin. "Still got my ranch, though. Cattle don't care much about board meetings." Emily chuckled, the sound a little hoarse from the cold. "You don't talk like a CEO." "Good, CEOs talk too much and listen too little." That made her laugh again, a genuine one this time. She didn't realize how much she'd needed that. Jackson tilted his head, studying her. "What kind of nurse are you?" "Emergency room. Or I was, up until yesterday." He whistled low. That's hard work. You must be tough. Maybe, or just stubborn. He liked that answer. They talked for over an hour, huddled together on the bench. Emily told him about her dream to work in pediatric trauma, her student loans, the patients who still haunted her thoughts. Jackson shared stories about ranch life, the time he got bucked off a wild mare, how his mom used to fix everything with cornbread and hot soup. As the snow continued to fall, Jackson noticed her hands shaking again. Without a word, he took off his thick flannel coat and draped it over her shoulders. "You're gonna freeze," she protested weakly. "I've got layers. You've got that paper-thin excuse for a jacket." She looked down, embarrassed. Didn't really have time to pack properly. "Tell you what," he said, standing up and stretching. "The station may be shut, but I've got a pickup parked just outside. Heated seats, full tank. We can wait for your train there if you want." Emily hesitated. "That's kind of you, but I don't know." "Fair enough," he said gently. "But I'll be right there if you change your mind. I'll leave the door unlocked." He walked off into the snow, boots crunching, leaving her with his coat, his cocoa, and something she hadn't felt in weeks: hope. And for the first time since losing her job, Emily didn't feel entirely alone. The wind picked up, and Emily clutched Jackson's flannel coat tighter around her. Every few minutes, she glanced toward the edge of the lot where his pickup sat, old but well-maintained, engine idling, exhaust curling like steam in the bitter air. She was still hesitant. Jackson seemed kind, but she barely knew him. Still, the ache in her fingers and toes reminded her that hypothermia wasn't going to wait for trust. Finally, she stood, slinging her duffel over her shoulder and making her way across the lot. Snow crunched under her sneakers, soaking through the soles. By the time she reached the truck, her legs were stiff, her lips nearly blue. Jackson leaned against the passenger door, holding it open. "Told you it was warmer in here," he said with a small smile. Emily climbed in, and a wave of heat wrapped around her. The leather seat warmed her from below. She sighed in relief. "You weren't kidding." He got in, rubbing his hands together. "I crank the heat to high in weather like this. Grew up with a dad who used to say, 'Boy, if you can't outwork the weather, outwit it.'" Emily chuckled as she pulled off her gloves and held her hands in front of the vents. "Smart man." They sat there in silence for a few minutes, letting the warmth thaw their bodies and ease the awkwardness. Jackson finally broke the quiet. "So what happens when you get to Topeka?" Emily paused. "I don't know yet. My mom passed last year, and the house was sold soon after. I've got a cousin who said I could crash on her couch for a bit." "Got any leads on another nursing job?" She shook her head. "Hospitals aren't exactly hiring extra staff right now, especially not ER nurses without specialty certifications." Jackson tapped the steering wheel with his fingers, thinking, "You ever consider small-town work? Out near where I live, we've got a clinic that's always short-staffed. It's not big city medicine, but it's honest work, and they'd be lucky to have someone like you." She looked at him sideways. "You're just saying that because I took your cocoa." He laughed. "Maybe. Or maybe I have a knack for spotting people who don't give up easy." There was a pause, and Emily's expression softened. "You barely know me." "I know enough," he said, glancing at her. "You were freezing out there and still polite. You're obviously used to putting others first. That tells me a lot." She didn't answer right away. She stared out at the falling snow, unsure of what to make of this stranger in a cowboy hat who seemed to see her more clearly than most people who'd known her for years. Then, almost without thinking, she said, "What's the name of the town?" Jackson smiled. "Redwood Bluff. Population, tiny. Views, incredible. Locals, nosy. But they mean well." Emily let out a breath she didn't know she was holding. "Maybe I could use a change of scenery." By morning, the storm had calmed. The first rays of sunlight cut through the lingering snow clouds, casting a golden glow on the frosted landscape. Emily rubbed her eyes as she sat up straighter in Jackson's pickup. She drifted off sometime after midnight, the warmth and his steady presence lulling her into the best sleep she'd had in weeks. Jackson was still in the driver's seat, hat tipped low, coat pulled up around his neck. His eyes opened slowly as he sensed movement beside him. "Morning," he said with a gravelly yawn. Did we really sleep here all night? Emily asked, glancing at the clock on the dash. Yep, your train never came. I figured letting you sleep was better than waking you up to freeze on the bench again. She blinked, stunned. You stayed out here just so I'd be warm? Jackson gave a half shrug. Didn't seem right to leave. Emily didn't know what to say. No one had done something that selfless for her in a long time. Maybe ever. As the world outside the windows slowly woke up, Jackson leaned forward and turned on the radio. A local station hummed to life, playing classic country beneath the morning news. After a beat, he turned to her. Still want to go to Topeka? Or do you want to see Redwood Bluff first? She hesitated. Her logical brain screamed that she should be cautious, but her heart, tired and aching for a fresh start, whispered something different. Redwood Bluff, she said quietly. Let's see what it's about. Jackson grinned. You won't regret it. They stopped at a diner just off the highway for breakfast. Emily devouring pancakes like she hadn't eaten in days, and Jackson sipping his coffee with a watchful smile. He paid for the meal before she could protest, saying, Consider it a welcome to your scouting trip. The drive to Redwood Bluff took a little over 3 hours. Emily stared out the window at the snow-draped fields and the distant rolling hills. It was nothing like Wichita. The land looked open and endless, framed by barbed wire fences, weathered barns, and grazing cattle. The quiet beauty of it all seeped into her bones. When they reached the town, Emily couldn't help but smile. Redwood Bluff was quaint and peaceful. A white-steepled church sat at the end of the main street, and tiny shops with hand-painted signs lined the road. A group of kids were building a snowman in front of the post office, their laughter echoing through the cold air. Jackson gave her a tour. He pointed out the general store, the old schoolhouse, and finally the clinic, a small building with a crooked sign and a sense of humility. The doc who runs it's been looking for help. Keeps saying he's too old to handle flu season by himself, Jackson said. I think you two would get along just fine. Emily looked at the clinic, then back at Jackson. I don't know what I expected, but this isn't it. He chuckled. Good or bad? She smiled. Good, really good. The clinic was busier than it looked. Dr. Walter Granger, a wiry man in his 60s with laugh lines and silver hair, greeted Emily with a firm handshake and a skeptical eye. That changed quickly once she rattled off her ER credentials, listed her trauma certifications, and calmly advised one of the nurses on how to treat a patient with frostbite, all within 10 minutes of walking in. She's sharp, Dr. Granger muttered to Jackson when Emily stepped out of the exam room to wash her hands. Told you, Jackson replied. By the time they left the clinic, Emily had already been offered a temporary contract to help through the winter. She was stunned. Just like that? It's a small town, Jackson said with a grin. When we find someone we need, we don't let them walk off. They drove a short distance out of town to Jackson's ranch, an expanse of rolling land with snow-blanketed fields, a red barn, and a farmhouse that looked like it had stories to tell. The wraparound porch creaked under their boots as he opened the door and ushered her inside. I've got a spare room if you'd rather not crash on your cousin's couch, he said. No pressure, just a roof and some privacy while you get settled. Emily looked around the warm, wood-paneled home. It smelled of cedar and coffee. There were photos on the walls, his parents, horses, a younger Jackson holding a trophy beside a prize bowl. It was more than a house. It felt like a life built with patience and intention. You live here alone? She asked. Just me and the cattle most days. My folks passed a while back, and I haven't had a reason to fill the other rooms since. Emily ran her fingers along the back of a worn leather couch. I appreciate the offer. Just for a few nights, until I figure things out. You're welcome as long as you need, Jackson said simply. That night over dinner, they shared more stories. She told him about her father's old guitar, how she used to sing along while he played Johnny Cash and Dolly Parton. He told her about how the land came back to life after years of drought, and how he had almost given up before it bloomed again. When the fire crackled low and the plates were cleared, Emily looked at him across the table and said, I don't know what kind of twist of fate brought us both to that train station, but I'm glad it did. Jackson met her gaze, his usual easy grin softened. Me too. Something shifted between them in that moment. Not romantic yet, but unmistakably intimate. Two people who had lived hard, honest lives, suddenly finding ease in each other's company. Outside, the snow fell gently across the ranch. Inside, the warmth lingered, not just from the fire, but from the quiet hope of new beginnings. Emily found herself falling into a rhythm she hadn't known she needed. Morning started early with coffee on Jackson's porch, wrapped in a quilt as the sun rose over the frost-tipped fields. She'd drive into town to work at the clinic, where she patched up farmers with frostbite, kids with coughs, and the occasional injured ranch hand who refused to rest. By evening, she returned to the ranch, sometimes to help Jackson feed the horses, sometimes just to talk. Days turned into weeks, and the cold winter began to loosen its grip. Emily grew familiar with the winding roads and the friendly faces in Redwood Bluff. She wasn't just a visitor anymore, she was becoming part of the town. People greeted her by name, and kids waved when she passed by in Jackson's old pickup. One evening, while they sat on the porch watching a herd of deer wander past the fence line, Jackson spoke up. "You ever think you'd stay?" he asked, voice low. Emily looked out at the pink-orange sky. "I came here thinking it would be temporary, just a place to catch my breath, but I don't know. It feels different now." "How so?" She turned to him, a soft smile playing at her lips. "Feels like I can exhale here, like I'm not chasing something anymore." Jackson nodded slowly. "I've watched a lot of folks come and go through this town. Some leave as fast as they arrive. But you fit here." She looked down at her hands, brushing her thumb over a scratch she'd gotten earlier, helping a boy bandage a scraped knee. "You really think so?" "I know so," he said. "And not just because the clinic runs smoother when you're around. You've got grit, Emily, and heart. That's rare." They sat in silence for a while, the moment heavy with meaning. Finally, Emily broke it with a quiet chuckle. "When I first met you, I thought you were some sweet old cowboy handing out cocoa to strangers." Jackson raised an eyebrow. "Old?" "Fine, just cowboy then," she teased. He leaned back in his chair, grinning. "And now, I think you might be the reason I stopped running." The confession hung in the air between them, tender and vulnerable. Jackson reached out, his fingers gently brushing hers. It wasn't a kiss or a grand gesture, just a simple touch, full of unspoken understanding. As the first wildflowers began to bloom across the snow-melted ground, Emily realized something she hadn't dared believe. She was no longer lost. She was home. By the time summer arrived, the snow had long since melted, and the hills of Redwood Bluff were painted in wild greens and golds. Emily had moved out of Jackson's spare room and into a small farmhouse on the edge of town, though she still found herself back at the ranch for breakfast more mornings than not. Word of her impact spread quickly. The clinic, once overlooked and underfunded, now had donors stepping forward, impressed by the stories of a big city nurse who brought life and order to a forgotten rural town. Dr. Granger half joked that she ran the place better than he did. Emily took it all in stride. Her days were still long, filled with patience and paperwork, but for the first time she didn't dread waking up. And each evening, as the sun dipped low behind the hills, Jackson was there. Whether to fix something at her house, drop off groceries she didn't ask for, or simply sit beside her in quiet companionship. It wasn't until the county fair rolled around that Jackson did something that truly caught her off guard. They were standing near the corral watching the kids rodeo when the announcer suddenly called Jackson's name. He turned, adjusting his hat with a sly grin. "Be right back," he said. Emily blinked as he walked into the arena. Instead of roping a calf or showing off a trick, he took the mic from the announcer and looked straight into the crowd. "I don't normally go for speeches," he began, "but there's someone here who changed my life with a cup of cocoa and a stubborn refusal to give up. Someone who walked into my world one snowy night and turned everything warmer." The crowd went still. Emily's heart pounded. Jackson stepped down from the platform and made his way through the crowd until he stood in front of her. With a nervous chuckle, he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small box. "Emily Grace Winters," he said, dropping to one knee. "You've already given me more joy than I thought I'd ever find. Would you do me the honor of marrying me and making this town, this life, our life?" Gasps and cheers erupted around them. Emily stood frozen for a moment, overwhelmed. Then her eyes met Jackson's, steady, kind, and hopeful. "Yes," she whispered, then louder, "Yes." He slipped the ring on her finger, and the crowd roared with applause. Their love story quickly became the talk of Redwood Bluff, and soon beyond. Local news picked it up, then regional news. Before long, a national reporter came to town to interview the millionaire cowboy and the nurse he rescued from the cold. That was how the world saw it. But for Emily and Jackson, the truth was simpler. They hadn't rescued each other. They just found the right person at the exact moment they stopped looking. And in the warmth of a small town and the comfort of open skies, they built a life neither of them had dared to dream of. Together, forever. Emily and Jackson's story reminds us that sometimes the most unexpected encounters can lead to life-changing moments. When kindness meets courage, new beginnings become possible, even in the coldest of times. Their journey shows how love, trust, and community can warm even the coldest hearts. If this story inspired you, don't forget to share it with someone who might need a little hope today. And if you're ready to embrace your own new beginning, take a small step forward. Because every great journey starts with just one step.